to renewable sources, solar
But
and wind.
but this is, as you said, something really challenging. So what could help these energy companies be successful in that future? So what is really needed?
So the biggest challenge in moving to renewable sources is energy storage. Why? Because solar energy is available when the sun is shining. When the sun is going away, the solar fields stand there and don't produce any energy. Wind energy is available when the wind is blowing strongly enough, and so it depends on the level of the wind. And when there's no wind, there's no production of energy. So the challenge, on the other hand, the demand is there all the time.
Yeah.
It's also changing somewhat, but it's there all the time. So in order to provide our civilization with constant flow of energy, we have to store energy. We have to store energy when it's available and be able to release it out of storage when it's not available. Today, this is the one biggest challenge of the renewable industry, besides installing more and more and more plants. So the plants, it's something, the technology is here. The price of the solar panels has decreased significantly in the recent years. So the biggest challenge is installation of systems. Installation of systems has to be pushed by governments, by institutional investors, etc., etc. And it does make sense in terms of the. I mean, it is a reasonable investment because you can reach return on investment pretty fast with the price of electrical energy today. So, as I said, the biggest challenge is storage. Storage today, the main area of storage is lithium-ion batteries, which are relatively expensive, relatively polluting. Another source of storage, of course, is there are multiple other solutions like high pressure air, like pumped storage, which means when you have energy, you pump water up to a high lake, and then when there's no energy, the water is flowing down, generating energy as it comes down. So it's really highly renewable because there's no pollution associated with that. But this is really the biggest challenge. The other challenge, which is still unsolved, or at least people are putting a lot of energy into it, but it's still unsolved, is the transfer of energy from the way where it's cheap to produce it to where it's needed. So just to take an example, Europe is a huge consumer of energy because Europe has a dense civilization. The Sahara Desert can be a huge producer of energy because of the sun. So, but you can produce energy in the Sahara, but how do you package it in small packages and ship it over to Europe? It's not so easy. You
Yeah.
cannot ship electrons. Europe, an undersea cable is a very expensive solution. This is something which is still unsolved. There is a magic word that is being used more and more often in energy circles, which is hydrogen. So
Wow.
it's not
You know
only
why I'm saying why? Because we had a comment about it. Gary Nako said that storage is the key to power generation as well as power usage, for example, cars. And then he said hydrogen. So he
hydrogen,
just, yeah. So thank
right?
Gary for your comment.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
hydrogen answers two issues. One issue is of course storage because you produce hydrogen using energy, which with a system called electrolyzer. We all studied in high school. We saw how to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
So you can create hydrogen using energy, and then you can reuse it using a reactor to create energy. But you can also transport hydrogen,
Hydrogen.
from cheap energy areas to high consuming areas. And this is something which is still under a lot of work, research. Can you do it in ships? Can you do it in pipelines? What is the safe way to transport hydrogen? So there are multiple solutions, but the optimal solution is still not there. But this is something that the energy industry is now working on quite intensively, because
Yeah.
once we find a cheap way, an efficient way to transport hydrogen from one place to the other, we will be able to produce energy in, let's say, Sahara. I'm just picking the Sahara. It could be the Arabian Desert and it could be the Negev. I mean, the Israeli desert. produce it in one place and use the energy in another place.
Yeah, you mentioned Israel. We're both from Israel. So we always, I think from the 60s, maybe we had solar panels in Israel to heat the water, but we
Right.
never used it for electricity. Could you explain why? We have lots of sun most of the year.
Yeah.
So
So
how do you explain?
first of all, it's a very interesting phenomenon. We had in the 50s, there was somebody, I don't remember his name now, who invented the solar water heater. And Israel, where electricity was really scarce and still is expensive, was a great solution because it's a hot climate. Most Israelis take a shower at least once a day, so you need hot water constantly, and it's very cheap. You get it for free basically. But the solar water heater is a relatively simple contraption. I mean, you put together a pipe, a black pipe, you put it in the sun, it heats up, the water goes through it, and it becomes hot. I mean, this is the basic principle. The photovoltaic cell is something which exists for a while, but the problem was for many years it was expensive. It was relatively expensive, and the ROI, the return on investment on installing photovoltaic panels on a roof or on a field, was not good enough. Prices came down significantly, but really significantly in the recent years, mainly due to Chinese production, which is still high quality but much lower cost. And the market it's very available now, highly available. So that's why it became much more available. The photovoltaic power source is today much more available than it used to be in the past. So,
Yeah.
but still, there's a question, and I've been asked by many guests who arrive in Israel by planes and look down as they land, and they say, "Why don't I see many solar fields in Israel?" And it's a big question. It has to do with probably with regulation, because Israel's energy market is relatively conservative. It's changing in recent years, but it's a relatively conservative market dominated by one major energy supplier. So there were not really enough incentives for people to produce energy on their own and supply it and sell it to the electric company. It's
Yeah.
changing in the recent years, and now it's becoming. I mean, they separated the generation from the network, so now you have business endeavors, and there are quite a few companies in Israel who build and install solar fields and sell the energy
Yeah.
to the electric company.